4 months. That's how long I was learning Vietnamese before I realized all of that time was basically wasted because I was making a huge mistake. And not only that, but it turns out over the entire 2 years that I studied Vietnamese, I was making at least three crucial mistakes that I've now realized other people are making as well, whether they're learning Vietnamese or any other language. So here are those three embarrassing mistakes I made while learning Vietnamese and what I would do different if I could start over. The first mistake I made was really embarrassing because it bled into real life, where I tried to use a language in a real world situation and the person I was trying to speak to had no idea what I was saying. To make matters worse, it was my mother in law. I was all excited. Let me show my mother in law how much I've been learning Vietnamese. And I went to try to speak to her, and she was like, "What? What are you talking about? What? I don't understand." Which is a horrible feeling if you're learning a new language. You just feel stupid. But the mistake I had made was that I didn't know there were different dialects in Vietnamese. As somebody who was taught English as a first language, you don't realize that other languages have different dialects. Now English does as well, but it's not as prominent as it is in other languages. For example, in Vietnam, there are three main dialects. There's the North, the Central, and the South. And little did I know, most of the resources online are geared towards the Northern dialect, which was completely useless to me. Now, don't get me wrong, the Northern dialect is beautiful in its own right, and it is, the official way to speak Vietnamese. But most of the people in my life speak Southern Vietnamese because they came from the South. In fact, if you're in a Western country, an English speaking country, and you're trying to speak Vietnamese to interact with the people in your country, then Southern Vietnamese is most likely what they speak, and that's going to be the most helpful dialect for you to learn. But whatever language you're learning, it's very important to figure out which dialect you should be focusing on. Because even if you do learn the language properly and you can get by with that dialect, it's going to make for a lot less friction, and it's going to mean a lot more to the people that you're learning the language for if you learn it in their specific dialect. By the way, if you are learning Vietnamese and you're trying to learn the Southern dialect, I'm going to put together some resources that are perfect for learning the Southern dialect, and I'll show you how to access those at the end. Don't worry, it's totally free. Now, the second mistake I made, which set me back months on my language learning journey, was that I focused mostly on trying to memorize words and grammar structures through things like Duolingo and textbooks and flashcards. Total waste of time, almost. Not entirely. I mean, look, grammar and learning vocabulary is very important, but most of the time you're going to pick up a lot of grammar structures just by listening to the language and figuring out which vocabulary words are important, which phrases are most commonly used. And while apps like Drops or Duolingo are great for, picking up certain vocabulary words that are useful and grammar structures, it's not going to give you the confidence you need to actually use the language in real life. It's just accumulating a lot of head knowledge about the language without actually making you comfortable use the language or making you feel confident in using the language in real life. But when I was starting out, I was putting all of my eggs in this basket. I was using Duolingo, I was using Drops every day, almost all day. Every free chance I had, I would be on these apps because I felt like, I was progressing. These apps are gamified in a way to make you feel like you're progressing. And in some way, you are progressing, but it's just not as much as you would think. You build up all this confidence, like, yeah, I completed the entire Duolingo Vietnamese language, so I should be able to go out and speak it, right? And then you get into a real world conversation and you're like, wait, what? What's happening right now? But more importantly, this is just not how you learn languages. This is how you might get started, might kind of get the groundwork, but this isn't exactly how you become fluent in a language. So what I wish I did instead was spent some time, yes, on the apps. I think that's important for picking up some vocab and basic grammar structures, getting started in a language. But I wish I spent much more time actually listening to content in my target language. I've picked up much deeper insights on Vietnamese and much more knowledge of Vietnamese from simply listening to the language than I ever did spending hours on any of these apps or using flashcards or anything like that. Because you'll realize one of the hardest things about learning any language, but especially Vietnamese, is understanding it. There's all kinds of different tones and all these various ways of saying the same thing that you might have learned one way of saying something when you don't know another way of saying it, and it's very confusing at times. But when you're listening to the language, even if you're not picking up new words, even if you're not, fully understanding what's going on, you're learning how to comprehend that language. Especially if you watch with subtitles on, not subtitles in English, but in subtitles in your target language, you're seeing how words, the way they're spelled, translate into how they're pronounced. And you're also hearing the language be used in different settings. So if you're hearing some YouTuber talk about something in Vietnamese, you're hearing maybe a more casual usage of the language than you would in Duolingo or in a textbook, for example. So that's the second thing I would do differently. I would spend less time on the apps, though I would still use them, definitely. I would spend more time actually listening to the language in conversational content, like stuff that you could find on YouTube. Again, I'll tell you at the end of this video how to find more resources on especially the Southern dialect of Vietnamese for totally free. But just as in the early days of learning Vietnamese, I wasn't listening to enough Vietnamese content, I was also not speaking it basically at all. At the very beginning, I was focused so much on getting head knowledge about the language, learning vocabulary, learning grammar, learning how to pronounce different things, learning the different tones in Vietnamese, all of that stuff, when I should have also been speaking the language in day to day life. And it wasn't until I actually got a tutor and met with that tutor once per week at least and started speaking the language in real conversation that I saw my progress skyrocket. Before this, I would really only speak Vietnamese with my in laws, and even then, I was too nervous to actually speak any meaningful amount of Vietnamese. It was just little phrases here and there that I felt confident enough to say, when most of the time I would freeze up and just try to avoid speaking the language at all costs because I was too afraid to sound stupid. Well, I have news for you. You're gonna sound stupid. And it's okay. You're going to sound really stupid at times. You're going to say the wrong word. You're going to offend somebody because you said something wrong. You're going to accidentally call somebody fat or something. Like, it's going to happen. Stuff like that is going to happen. But it's okay. That's how you learn. And if you don't do that, if you don't take the risk of looking stupid, then you're never going to look smart enough and actually be able to use the language in real life. I feel like when you're learning a new language, at least for me, I really wanted to impress people. So if I were to speak Vietnamese to my mother-in-law, for example, and she were to correct me, that would break my heart because I would just want to I want to impress her. So if I said something wrong, I'd be like, dang it, I want her to think I already know everything. But obviously they know you're not going to know everything when you just started learning the language. Even if you've been learning the language for a year, you're still not going to be fluent. So if I was starting over on day one of learning Vietnamese, what I would do different is I would get a tutor like right away, immediately. And I would also speak the language as much as possible, whether with that tutor or in real world situations where I could. Just go to a coffee shop or something and order in your target language. And if you mess up, just say, sorry, I'm practicing, I'm trying to learn, but I'm not fluent yet. I'm just trying to learn. They understand. It's okay. Or even if you don't have an opportunity to use the language in a real world conversation, you can at least speak it aloud to yourself when you're not meeting with your tutor. For example, when you're using the apps like Duolingo or Drops or whatever other app is out there in the world, there's so many now. As you're learning words, actually say the words out loud. Or when you're learning a phrase, actually say the phrase out loud. And if it doesn't sound right to you, just keep saying it until it does. Also, as you're watching content in your target language with the subtitles in the target language, no English subtitles, I can't stress that enough, do what is called mirroring, where you're repeating the words after the person is saying it. So you're watching their lips move, you're hearing the word, maybe you're seeing the text, and you're also repeating the word, trying to sound as much like their pronunciation as possible. I also have a video where I talk to ChatGPT in Vietnamese to see if it could help me with my pronunciation and in role-playing daily, situations that you might need Vietnamese in. And it can be helpful, but it has its limitations as with everything. So go check out that video linked up here to see if ChatGPT can help you learn your language. So those are the 3 things that I wish I did differently. I wish I would have researched the dialects of Vietnamese first and figured out which one to learn, and also figure out which one Duolingo or Drops is teaching me so that I could avoid, relying on them for certain words and vocab. I also wish I would have started listening to Vietnamese content much earlier on because that would have helped me understand the language a lot faster. And lastly, if I would have been speaking Vietnamese as much as I could, even if I sounded terrible, even if I looked stupid, I would have picked it up a lot more quickly. I would have become confident a lot more quickly. Yes, I would have looked stupid at times. Yes, I would have made mistakes and people would have corrected me or laughed at me, made fun of me, whatever. But I would have picked up the language a lot more quickly if I did that. So whatever language you're trying to learn, maybe you've made these mistakes before. I don't know, let me know in the comments. But hopefully this video helps you avoid these mistakes if you're still early on in your language learning journey. If you are trying to learn Southern Vietnamese and you're having a hard time finding resources dedicated to that specific dialect, I know it is tough. I've put together a document in my Patreon. Don't worry, it's completely free. You don't have to be a paying member to get this information, but it is in my Patreon. I will link that in the pinned comment, so go check that out. And hopefully you find those resources helpful for learning Southern Vietnamese. Make sure to like this video and subscribe because next week I'm going to be doing a challenge where I talk to a lot of people in Vietnamese. I'm going to be spending the whole day only speaking Vietnamese. So if you want to see that video, you can go ahead and subscribe so you catch that next time. And if you want to see it early, you can become a member at my Patreon where you will get all videos early, as well as many other great perks. So go check that out to find out more. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Until I see you next time, cheers.